and welcome to our Insights from Industry event here, hosted by Weston College. I'm Dave Crew, Head of Business Growth and Employer Partnerships at the college, and I'd like to formally welcome you all to the event this morning. This is our first Insights from Industry event that we're having at the college, and the reason we are doing this is we're building on the event series that we delivered last year called the Wednesday Working Lunch, where we brought a collective audience of over 700 people together over 10 weeks to connect during the pandemic. And now that we're in another lockdown, we feel it's important to give people an opportunity to connect and collaborate. And the theme behind Insights from Industry is connecting business with education. We'll be interviewing high-profile guest speakers throughout the series, delivering at least 2 events each month on an ongoing basis, and we'll be recording these events and storing them on the college website, providing a resource for all in the region and beyond to view. We've got a great audience joining us today, and our first guest speaker is Dr Paul Phillips CBE, who is Principal and Chief Executive of Weston College Group. Dr Paul will be interviewed by Louise Greene, Business Partnership Manager at Weston College, and also Daniel Greene, who's Management Apprentice of the Year at the Gloucestershire Apprenticeship Awards. At the end of the event, I'll remind you of what's coming up, but for now, before I hand over to Louise and formally introduce Dr Paul, I'd just like to remind you that this is an interactive session, and we'll be asking Dr Paul questions, but please feel free to ask your own questions by using the chat box function. I'd welcome you to do that. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Louise Greene from Weston College, and we will start interviewing Dr Paul.
Thank you very much. So firstly, welcome Dr Paul. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
So first question then, can you please tell us about your career background and how you began your career, and was becoming a leader one of your career aspirations?
Okay, I think my career has been quite diverse. I left school and got a job in a hotel where I was dealing with catering, etc. I worked my way up to manager of that hotel. I then decided at that point I would go to night school and do some qualifications, which I duly did, and then went on to Cardiff University, where I did a degree in maths, stats and operational research. When I graduated then, I worked for the Ministry of Defence on computer-aided command systems and did a variety of work. But what I found when I was working for the MOD was that I was never allowed, for obvious reasons, to see a project through from beginning to end, from the secret nature of the work. And that did get me down. I came home, I used to do 3 months on, 1 month off. I came home for 1 month, and at that point, my mother suggested that could I fill in at an evening class at the local college to teach some maths, which I duly did. And I got hooked on that career in education. So I then got a series of jobs in education, did my teaching qualifications part-time, and eventually had a career where I worked with industry through the FE College Network. But actually, in terms of my career now, I've worked with 5 different colleges. A whole range of industries. I've been an inspector for education, etc. So it's been quite a diverse career. And I think in many ways, I'm glad it was diverse, and I'm glad I wasn't really a typical learner, in the sense that I had to explore jobs, careers, etc., and then get myself moving.
Great, thank you. So it was. So you said that your mother had asked you to teach at the college. So was your mother a teacher as well?
No, my mother was a secretary down in the university in Cardiff. But you didn't really argue with my mother. So I suppose all in all, in the end, I did what I was told, and I absolutely loved it, which was amazing to me, because I'd been in trouble in school, really. I wasn't a model student. in between the years sort of 11 to 16, far from it.
It's funny how these opportunities present themselves through life,
yeah,
don't
it is
they?
really. But I think it was good experience though, because I became poacher turned gamekeeper really.
Excellent. So what were the key leadership and management positions? Oh, you've kind of already covered that really in terms of what kind of roles that you've had before coming to the college. But what was it that actually motivated you to take on the principal's role here at Weston College?
Well, I suppose the Weston College job, and I've still got the advert, was advertised as an outstanding college with outstanding finances and outstanding opportunities. So at the time I was a deputy principal in a college in Wales, as it happened. And I thought, this will be a good challenge for me now. I've been a deputy for a little while and I'd like to have my own chance at taking something on and being my own responsibility. Mm-hmm. So that was the volition, if you like. When I arrived, it was a completely different story. I suppose I kept it was outstanding because the curriculum quality was inadequate. It was in deficit financially, and it had very little to offer, in my view, to the community of North Somerset.
Nothing like false advertising, is there?
Well, I suppose at the end of the day, you sort of you start to have a good look at what you've inherited.
Yeah.
And you analyse what you've got. And there were some brilliant, as there is today, brilliant teachers there. And, you know, from a leadership perspective, what it didn't have was, in the main, it had some, but it didn't have managers who could literally manage and develop.
Wow. So what kind of strategies did you put in place for those people that sort of were kind of doing the job but weren't quite managing effectively?
Well, what I did, if I'm honest, in the first 3 months, I didn't do a lot. I spent time going around the college, speaking to staff, speaking to learners, going out to the college, speaking to local schools, particularly speaking to employers about their needs and what they wanted. And then I came back and then I introduced a new structure and approach that I wanted to use, which was very much about dissecting everything that was there and having a modular approach to delivery and creating advisory boards where industry were influencing what we wanted. Yeah. The difficulty was that whilst the lecturers, I think, were very open to this new approach, a lot of the managers were not. But I decided to plough ahead for 8 weeks in terms of that new model. Mm-hmm. And work with the managers to try and develop change. Brilliant. And I realised after 8 weeks that the majority of the managers were not prepared to take on this change, so I got rid of them.
Okay.
And I kept one in particular who rose all the way himself up to a deputy principal and retired just last year.
So, did you personally mentor him?
I wouldn't say I personally mentored him. I would say I personally made sure there was a new ethos in the organisation and that he and others could spread that ethos. And also you brought in new blood and started management training schemes within the organisation. Very much about growing your own, I think, in today's in today's market, because at the end of the day, if you get the ethos right, I think you're on with a real chance of success.
And how did you sort of take that that transformation beyond being just local to Weston-super-Mare to becoming an outstanding education provider with a national reputation for success? How did you take it that one step further?
I think the answer is gradually. I'd love to tell you I'd done it overnight, but I certainly didn't. I think what I had to do was develop people, have a real team approach so that I could advance things. And then once I'd created that team and I felt we were dealing with the local needs, then we started to deal with the regional needs.
Mm-hmm.
And when the regional needs were being met, then I felt we had the confidence to start bidding for some national work. The advantage was, if you got the capacity and the ethos developing in your staff, the rest of things just happen naturally.
Yeah. Okay. And what would you say has been your biggest, or the biggest challenges that you faced, and how did you tackle them?
I think the biggest challenge I faced, and I think I underestimated it, if I'm honest, when I first came, was the ability to actually convince people of the necessity for change. Management of change is a huge thing in any environment. You know, when I've worked in industry as a manager, it's been the same. You know, cultivating a change of approach and a new management approach never is that well received. You've got to take the people with you. And I think for the first 18 months, if I'm honest, I did my best, but I had a mixed audience and a mixed response. And I sort of get it, because at the end of the day, the level of change was huge. Yeah. But after 18 months, we had a visit from the inspectorate. And I must admit, I was really losing sleep over that, although I felt we were making reasonable progress. And they came in and they actually graded the area of provision where we looked after students with learning difficulties and disabilities as outstanding. Well, that word had never been used in the vocabulary, really, of Weston College. And that was the day the staff turned, because that was the day I think staff actually believed that the change was having impact. And at the end of the day, in any management leadership role, you've got to prove impact. And I can remember coming out of college, the inspectors had been there all week. And it was a Friday afternoon. It was about 4:30, and the pub opposite was absolutely packed. And there were staff sitting out on the wall, and you could just feel the sense of elation in the staff that suddenly Weston College was going on the map, and it had excellence recognised. And that was my happiest journey home, really, in those first 2 years, because that's what I can measure it back to that day. Everything is about impact, but that was the moment of impactful change for me.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, yeah, there's been a huge impact. I mean, you know, look at all the awards that have, you know, you've supported with Weston College in winning, and, you know, all the accreditations, and it's just exploded, hasn't it?
I think it's about calculated risk. I think in business these days, you know, and I think COVID itself has had a, you know, massive effect on all of us, but you've got to take that calculated risk and you've got to decide what can you do, and also face up to what you can't do, and then concentrate on what you're doing well. You'll always meet people who'll tell you why something can't be done. But it's meeting and working with the people who tell you something can be done. And you've got to get that ethos.
Yeah.
And I had a feeling that maybe we were developing the ethos right. And when we had our last inspection, which was some years ago now, it was a Sunday. And I remember saying to my partner, who works for the NHS, I'm just going to pop into work. I said, it's 2:00 now. We'll have the inspectors arriving tomorrow morning. I'm just gonna pop in and just have a walk around the sites, just to make sure it's all okay. And I drove over, came to the college, and worked my way around the sites, and everything looked good. But I was in absolute shock because everybody was in, and it was a Sunday afternoon. I didn't ask them to come in. Everybody was in. They wanted to show off what we did. They wanted to show off what they were doing with learners. And that's the best start you can have, really, is when your staff believe in learning. And our sort of mantra here, or strapline, has been creating brighter futures for our learners and the employers we work with, and the apprentices. I can remember a day in Weston College when I spoke to a lady called Sarah Marshall from what was called the Learning and Skills Council then, and said, how do I go about delivering apprentices? And she worked with me, and we, with the staff, created teams, and now we've got literally thousands of apprentices we serve. But I can remember the day when there weren't any.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's been a journey, and it's a real evolution, I think.
Yeah. And just going back to what you were saying about, you know, the staff coming in, you know, on a Sunday afternoon without being asked, you know, that sort of leads really nicely kind of into my next question, which is, you know, and I guess as a member of the staff at the college myself, we really embrace the term that you use, which is creating sparkle. So how do you think you embedded that culture within the staff to achieve their sparkle in their roles, and to want to be able to come in on a Sunday afternoon, you know, to get things ready for an Ofsted inspection?
Okay, well, I suppose if I go back to my own experience of being a lecturer in FE, and in those days you went in as a sort of assistant lecturer, and then you worked up to a associate lecturer and so on. It was a real sort of crazy approach. But the thing I remembered most is how few people ever said thank you to the staff. You know, the learners would say thank you, but in terms of the organisation, the governors, the leadership, it was rare for them to have personal thank yous, etc. So for me, it was about recognising staff for what they did. And so therefore, I started a reward system, really, in the sense of celebrating the success of learners, which we did on a massive scale in the Winter Gardens, but also celebrating twice a year, summer and Christmas, the successes of our staff. And it doesn't matter what the staff member is, it could be at any level in the college, but celebrating what they've achieved, what has been that added value, making sure at Christmas, you know, they do get some element of recognition. I've been a bit crazy this last Christmas, I can tell you, but you know, in normal years, doing your best to recognise staff. And then with the COVID issue, obviously very different strategies had to be employed, but you always have to recognise staff and what they give, and what they do. I've always had a firm, simplistic view, really, is that if you support your staff and you develop them, 99%, maybe more of those staff will give their very best. You'll always have a small cohort who don't want to know. But that's fine, because I can direct them to the entrance to leave permanently. I'm very much about we all give for the learner, and the staff at Weston are brilliant anyway. It's very rare to come across somebody who doesn't want to buy in to our ethos. Occasionally we see examples of that, but it's rare.
Yeah. And I think, you know, just saying thank you is, you know, I don't think generally in other organisations that I might have worked in before, people don't necessarily say it enough. And actually, it doesn't take a lot to say thank you, does it? And, you know, congratulate someone on a job well done.
No, it doesn't actually. And it doesn't matter how, you know, you can work in a very busy college, in a Weston College, over 1,000 employees. You still don't know how that employee feels. And even when you're surrounded in a very busy environment, it can still be a lonely life in terms of, you know, delivering the goods from your own perspective. When I first wanted to be a principal, the principal in my college at the time said to me, "Welcome to the loneliest job in the world." And she was spot on, because, you know, you can do everything you want, but as a leader, the buck stops with you, correctly so. But when the buck does stop with you, at times it can be extremely lonely, especially because, you know, we're all human. We don't get everything right. Sometimes we adopt strategies and they don't come to fruition in the way we hoped. And then, you know, you've got to try not to take it too personally and carry on, motivating your staff, motivating yourself to deliver the goods.
Perseverance is the key.
It is really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And whatever you're facing, and it's never been greater, I think, for my staff than in the last 12 months.
Mm. Yeah, and you know, COVID's really thrown a spanner in the works for everybody, hasn't it? And obviously, there's been a great deal of change that's taken place in the college to adapt to this new world. So, kind of on that kind of thread, what are your thoughts about the leadership qualities required for the future, and how do you think leadership will change in a post-COVID world?
Right, I think there's a couple of things I'd say. I think the first thing is that COVID has been a massive challenge, but you have to see it as well as the challenges. Can they lead to some element of opportunity? And I think for us in the college, we've had to learn to work with industry in a very different way. Mm. We've had to rely on industry telling us more of what they want than ever, particularly in terms of how we support their staff on training, etc. But I think as well, and assuming the vaccinations work and we see a massive reduction in COVID, or it becomes a virus disease that we're able to deal with, then irrespective, for me, that's fine. But we are going to move to an environment, I think, where we look at things differently. I've always been, as you know, about, well, we're growing the business, so we'll open a new building, we'll develop the estate further, which has been great. But I think I've also seen the value of digital learning across the organisation. And really, I think the future is about getting a mix of digital learning with face-to-face delivery. And I think we probably in the future would see maybe a third of our work being digital and 2/3 still being face-to-face. But that would have implications then, I think, that you might look at your estate differently. And rather than expanding it, you may be investing more in the digital capacity of your estate and your staff, as well as maintaining a high proportion of face-to-face delivery of teaching and learning. So it is going to be different. But it's still going to be about that ethos of putting the learner first and people going above and beyond. And I think there's a much greater confidence now in using, you know, virtual mechanisms for teaching. We haven't got much option, really, have we, at the moment? So until we had the lockdown a few weeks ago, we were doing 80% of our delivery face-to-face, 20% virtual. And I would imagine when the lockdown ends, that's what we'll go back to. I also think there's that bit of alignment that's going to come in, because I fully understand why the external exams in GCSE, A levels, etc. can't go ahead as normal. But that will, in my mind, mean that in terms of young people coming to the college, you will probably see a very high proportion of estimated and possibly inflated grades. And then the difficulty there for us is, first of all, identifying, you know, the level at which a learner is at, so that you can create the right learning package for them and they're not disadvantaged in any way. So it's going to be tricky, I think, but it's totally doable. I do get frustrated at the sort of ethos I see in some educational institutions. You know, we'll cancel this and we'll cancel that. That's not what we're here for. You know, we're here for learners, and getting that right means that we've got to really grab the nettle on this. And I think we've done well. I think we created My Virtual College, which is an update every week to staff, where I can celebrate some successes through that. I write to staff every week. If they've excelled in something, they'll get a note from me, or a recognition, or a bottle of wine through the post or something. Best I can do. So, but you've got to keep up that recognition, because staff deserve it. And I think the other thing I would say, which I don't think is unique to Weston College, but I think that COVID is creating a perfect storm in terms of mental health and well-being. I don't think this has been picked up by government sufficiently. And I think when we do get back to, inverted commas, normality, we will be dealing with that implication, which is a perfect storm in many ways, for some time. So we're going back to a tricky world, I think.
Yeah.
But
I guess the key is being agile, though, isn't it? You know, you've got kind of, you know, go where the river cuts, I suppose.
Yeah, very well put. I mean, agility is the name of the game. But it's just like the growth and evolution of the college. You've got to get your strategies right. They've got to be understood, and people have got to see the value of the impact of them. You know, it's dead easy for somebody to write a plan. It's much more difficult to put the plan in action and measure the impact.
Yeah.
I mean, in my inspection roles, I've seen loads of institutions with the most glorious of strategic plans, which haven't got a cat in hell's chance of working because they're not reflecting the realities.
Yeah.
So being realistic and honest and having really good open communication from a leadership perspective is crucial.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. So you'll be pleased to hear there aren't any more questions from me for a minute or so. So I'd just like to now introduce Daniel. So just before I formally introduce him properly, I'd just like to let you know that Weston College train hundreds of new aspiring and experienced managers regionally and nationally. So the reason we've invited Daniel, who I'd like to introduce now, to join us is to be a voice of the students. We have, as I say, a number of apprentices on programme studying level 3 and level 5 apprenticeships in leadership and management, and they have formulated some questions. Just to introduce him properly, so Daniel has, as I said, has been an apprentice with us for some years. So he started on his level 3 apprenticeship and then moved on to his level 5. Daniel had been 10 years in service with his employer, ASG UK, and after 10 years, he was offered his first management role as an engineering manager. And I guess it's important to mention at this point that Dan had never considered a management role, you know, in his future, and unfortunately didn't do terribly well in his GCSEs. But as a new manager, he came to us, he started on the level 3, gained his maths and English, and absolutely excelled. Upon completion, went on to do the level 5, which is like an operational management level apprenticeship, and has since been promoted to company director and is now even a shareholder of the company he works for. So given his remarkable achievements, Dan has also gone on to win the Gloucester Apprenticeship of the Year award. So Dan, over to you to ask the questions from the apprentices.
Very much, Louise. Yes, so these questions are for Dr. Paul. So the first one comes from Thomas. Managing multiple teams can be difficult, particularly ensuring they communicate effectively. What is a good way to make sure different teams maintain good communication?
I think for me, and I suppose I've got that where I currently work with the different teams, is to make them part of the communication strategy. So rather than sort of communicating downwards, it's very much about representatives of those teams being part of the actual strategy. So they're actually setting the strategy, and that you never feed back to one person. You feed back to a range of disciplines, but most of all is how you maintain that communication. It's been crucial for me to try and avoid silo management during COVID. So the creation of my virtual campus, which is a communication vehicle for every member of staff, has helped in that respect. What you can't do, what you've got to do is try and avoid silo management, because if you have silo management, then everything will start to unravel.
Yeah. And are there any sort of good communication tools you use? Is it sort of emails, phone calls, face-to-face? What do you value in these times?
I don't think there's anything better. If sometimes there's nothing better than just picking up the phone and speaking to somebody and saying, look, we got this issue. I suggest we do X and Y. Have a think on it, and then bring your team back together. We'll have a very quick catch up in the morning on Teams and confirm the route we're going to take, or I'll use Zoom or another platform. I do use email in terms of communicating with my top leadership board, but generally there's nothing better than picking up the phone and also having meetings with managers on a regular basis, pre-COVID, obviously, face-to-face.
Brilliant. Again, question from Thomas. As a leader, what do you find is a good way to build an effective team? Is it trial or error, or is there a system you use to create a cohesive team?
Well, I think there's lots of different ways you can look at this. For me, I've always been interested in the ethos of a person. We're an educational institution, so therefore, what is their view towards learners? How do they deal with barriers to learning? And what can they actually bring to the organisation? I sit in on the interview of every member of staff for my organisation, whether it's for a caretaker or it's a deputy principal. And whilst it's time consuming, and sometimes I think not the best use of my time, because it adds to my working day, nevertheless, I know that the people in the organisation have got the ethos. And often in an interview, it's not just about the experience, it's not just about the qualification, it's more about what people feel they can do, what they can bring, what they feel they can change, their sense of realism. And that is what I look for in creating an ideal team. The other thing I look for is how the skills jigsaw with what I've got. So I had two very experienced people retire at Christmas. So I also knew the skill set of the rest of my management team. So when we went out to recruit for their replacements, it was testing their ethos, but also testing that they would have a skill set that would complement others. The last thing I want is stereotypes. I want people who can think for themselves, will challenge themselves, will challenge me. So ideally, we will get the product right.
Yeah, and in terms of that, I mean, I guess as well, you're sort of looking at the skills pipeline, sort of covering off areas like that, because as you say, people retire, people leave businesses, and that can leave a hole. So actually, sometimes I think you sort of said about the deputy principal that he came on and he's worked his way all the way through the college.
Right.
So actually having that pipeline to sort of fill in those gaps.
Yeah, and I often do my own management development sessions for staff who want to progress. And I often, it's when I first started, for instance, I made sure that the people who came in to develop my staff had no knowledge of education at all. They were commercial people who gave that insight into the world of business to my staff, who were basically pretty good teachers and reasonable managers, but they didn't have the commercial insight, which in my view was critical to develop the business.
Yeah, I think the other thing that you sort of touched on with Louise's questions is you sort of said if people are not effective in the team, if they don't fit into your ethos as a college, if they're not willing to be part of that and engage, that actually you're not frightened of actually letting them go and sort of showing them the door.
No, you can't. You have to, in fairness, you need to give people a real chance to deal with the management of change and to develop and create what you want. But if they don't want to know, then my advice is don't take any prisoners.
Yeah, good. Next question comes from Laura. Relating to key experiences, what are the 3 key tips you would give for leading and managing?
The 3 tips for me would be, number 1, go with your gut feeling. When I haven't gone with my gut feeling, I've got things wrong. So if you've got a gut feeling about something, go with it. Number 2, develop trust both ways in your organization. And number 3, be prepared to take calculated risk.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? It's the calculated risk, especially as we've sort of alluded to in these COVID times, things like that. We're all developing, and sort of, I know with my business, I've had to take some calculated risks and look at different strategies. And it is one of those things that you sort of have to look at. And it's not just saying, right, well, we're going to throw loads of money over here, this, that, and the other. We're talking about sort of calculated risk where you haven't spent too long evaluating and going through them, but actually you've got a good overview, a sort of gut instinct that is actually worthwhile taking.
I think so. I tell my people, to be proactive, but not reactive.
Good. Next question from Claire. What do you think is your biggest strength as a leader?
That's a good question, actually. I think my biggest strength would be my people skills, the ability to sit down with any group of staff and talk to them in the same way as I would talk to a couple of friends down the local pub. It's about that level of being able to communicate, to understand, but at the same time to leave nobody in any doubt that you are leading the change process, and you will not be influenced really regarding the journey you want to take your organization through. But that power to talk and listen is probably massive. I think there's two things really. The other thing is the entrepreneurial bit, that you can think outside the box and realize there's more than one way to crack the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, I sort of value your first point, because that's the biggest change in myself as a manager. When I first came in, it was sort of, I just treated people as sort of numbers in the organization. They didn't mean anything to me. And it was sort of, there was none of that sort of, right, I'm on your level here, you're just people who come to work. And actually where the transition's been is I value those people. And actually, as you say, what I've seen is the value since actually coming alongside them, talking to them, working with them, understanding them as a friend, and sharing their emotions and sharing their experiences, things like that. And actually I've seen such an improvement in the team just working alongside those people. So I really get what you're saying on that.
I think you're sowing the seed of the ethos you want, aren't you, when you start to do that, you see?
Absolutely. I think you've already touched on this one, but we'll just cover it again. It's another question. What do you think is the best way to motivate staff?
The best way to motivate staff is always to show them the impact of something. But generally, before that happens, you need to celebrate their successes in a very public way so that they actually realize how highly they're valued. It might be for a change of approach. It may be for something they've done to support others. It may have been about in terms of winning another contract. For me, it may be because they've given some bespoke help to a distinct company or a learner. It doesn't matter. But when they go that extra mile, celebrate what they've achieved. And recognition of that. It's not about throwing loads of money at it. It is about recognition and them feeling they are valued within your organization.
Yeah, and you said about public recognition there, sort of in a public way. What sort of methods would you use to do that? Is that sort of social media, or is there a way that you'd approach that?
Well, to be honest, if the COVID issue is resolved, then I would honestly say there is nothing nicer than once a year to take your staff out for a dinner, which the business pays for, and which the celebrations can actually occur there and then. I gave a similar talk to the NHS a few years back, and they actually replicated what I do with the NHS in North Somerset, and they held a large dinner in the Winter Gardens where the chief exec was recognising the contribution of staff generally, and also the contribution of particular staff. And it's that sense of value, that the staff are valued, that the job they do is in itself valued, and that every member of staff gets an overview from the chief exec or the boss on what's been achieved and what one might look forward to in the future and what the challenges might be. You bring together celebration and communication simultaneously.
Yeah, that's really good. Question from Andy. How would you describe your leadership style?
Very direct. If I elaborated a bit, I would be very clear on expectation. I would not be critical of failure, because you don't always get everything right. But I would expect to be appraised as different projects developed, rather than suddenly learn that something wasn't working. So I would describe my style as direct, with an expectation of directness back, particularly from my leadership team.
That's great. Question from Charlie. Do you think your leadership style has changed over the years, and if so, in what way? What advice would you tell your younger self when starting out on your management journey?
I think everybody's leadership style changes slightly, because you get better at reacting to situations as time goes on. So I suppose I'm probably more empathetic as a leader now than I've ever been in my life, but I've still been very direct in terms of approach. When I started in high-level management, I was too cautious, I think. And when I look at some of the colleges I ran, etc., I showed a level of caution, which was fine. But a year or two down the line, I always wished I'd been more robust in what I'd done in terms of restructure. But you're always balancing what you can get away with as a new manager vis-a-vis, the long-term goal. So I always got to the long-term goal. But structuring the business I always say to my staff, you want the right people on the right seat on the right bus. You need to tick all three boxes. And that would be my advice to new managers. Whatever you do, try and create a model for whatever part of your business, and then the whole business, that you've got that right person on that right seat on that right bus for the right destination you want. And that's much easier said than done. And sometimes you have to do it in a piecemeal way. And sometimes you have to, if you feel the direct model isn't going to work, then start with the discussion model, but effectively be clever with your rhetoric, so you build them round to your way of thinking. There's no better manager who thinks that their solution is theirs, even if you've guided them towards that solution. So, a little bit of rhetoric, it doesn't go amiss in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there anything you'd sort of change in your career, as sort of your management career, things that if you could go back and start all over again, that you would do things slightly differently?
No, I don't think there's anything I would have changed, because I actually think the different experiences I had of working in the hospitality trade, working for the MOD, they interestingly gave me, and probably still do, the greatest confidence in the world of work. So they taught me how to deal with people from a very early stage. They taught me how to talk to people, and they taught me how to value education. And the one thing I can say is I've loved everything I've done, but I have loved my job in Weston most of all, because I feel it's been a journey, and I feel it's been something where I've been able to have direct influence. What I hate about it is the bureaucracy we face. you know, I still fill in loads of bloody reports galore, which frankly don't help man or beast, because I'm really about the impact at the learner face, the impact with the employer, the impact nationally with a major contract. But you jump through a lot of hoops alongside that, and maybe it's necessary, but the bureaucracy at times can be overwhelming. And I always say to my staff, focus on the end goal at all times. Remember what we're here for. We have not been brought into this world to write reports ad infinitum. We've been brought in to influence people's lives in terms of their career progression. I'm on my hobby horse now, so I'll shut up.
No, that's fine. I mean, I certainly see the impact of that on my life and my management career. I mean, obviously what Weston's done for me is absolutely amazing, for me personally, but also for the company. We've gone through some difficult times. We've turned the company around, you know, I have a focus team, all of those things. And that all came from the education that I received at Weston. So you're certainly hitting that ethos and sort of hitting your mission there. Final question comes from James. Given the current situation and global pandemic, what 3 key strengths do you look for in senior leaders, and have these strengths changed due to the pandemic?
The three strengths I look for in leaders is, number one, their focus and directness of getting the job done. Number 2, their empathy and support for their staff teams. And thirdly, that they can understand the cost-benefit analysis of their area, that they know, and it's even more crucial now, that they know that, you know, the income you bring in has got to, at the very worst, equal your costs. Even and in a normal world, that it would be making a small contribution to profit, because obviously in a business such as mine, any profit I make, I can reinvest for improved resources for learning.
That's great. I think that's all the questions I have for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice to talk to you.
And
thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Brilliant questions from both Louise and Dan. There have been, Dr. Paul, some questions in the chat box, so I don't think I'm going to get time to go through them all, but I'm just going to pick out a few if you don't mind. So just to utilise the time. We've had a question from Emily Burnell, which is really interesting, and she's talking about the idea of recognising failure and using failure positively. So she's asked the question, would you agree with the concept of recognising failure and showing widely how we can learn from it?
I think some of the greatest successes in what I've done have emanated because of mistakes made earlier on in a journey. So I think, yes, you should recognise failure, but in the context of how that failure has influenced change and brought about a positive change in the medium to long term. So the answer would be yes, but with that caveat. It's got to be about the impact. If you had a failure, the impact was that certain things changed, and then the changes actually brought about something good. That's how I would recognise failure. I wouldn't recognise it in any other way. If somebody's just failed at something and not learned from that, well, that's not something to be recognised, quite frankly.
And a question from Amber Clark, who's part of our work placement team at Weston College. And Amber's asked you, what would you say has been a highlight of your career so far as principal at Weston College?
I suppose the highlight of my career so far was when all the work we deal with learning difficulty and disability was recognised for the Queen's Anniversary Award. And the highlight was not that, but the highlight was actually being able to take some of those learners to Buckingham Palace so they could actually meet the royal family. And so they actually, again, it's that bit about sharing the message. It'd been very easy for me just to go up and shake hands, etc. And that is what I didn't want. What I wanted was the learners themselves to go up and prove to the royal family and others their learning experience and what they had achieved at Weston College.
And thank you. And final question, because we've asked you quite a lot of questions this morning, so I appreciate that. Is a kind of a twist on a question that Alison Clues has asked, and Alan's part of our prison education team at HMP Coldingley. And I think that I'm going to reflect back on my my first day at Weston College, and I've got the 3 words in my mind that you told me on my first day. But I just want to ask you, if I was a brand new member of staff arriving at your organisation on day 1 today, what advice would you give me?
Well, I suppose the first thing is I would have to understand what the role was, because I obviously would tailor it to the role. But the generic points I'd be saying to you is, you are joining an organisation which is ambitious and entrepreneurial. Enjoy it. The second thing I'd be saying is, you can go all the way to the top here, but don't expect the college to just give you the bits to get there. You've got to have that volition yourself to grab opportunity. And the third thing I'd say is, you're joining an organisation which will value its staff and simultaneously value its learners.
I think that's a perfect way to end the interview. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul, for your time this morning, and to Louise and Dan. I'm just going to, before I say final thank yous, I'm just going to begin to summarise the event. But that was really good. Thank you. So Emma, you wouldn't mind just sharing the last few bits of the event. So I'm aware that we've got many people, including employers, joining us at the moment. And just a reminder that if any of you would like to act as an extra pair of hands from our students with their unique skill set, then do please get in touch with our work placement team, who are available to help you, because there's many businesses needing a lot of support at the moment, and we have a lot of enthusiastic students who are looking to provide that support. Each Insights from Industry event has a theme. Obviously today we've been talking about transformational leadership, but I think it's important that we point out how we can support your organisation with leadership and management training, and specifically accessing funding to help you pay for that training. And as you can see there, we've got various options from mentoring training, for those who are going to be mentoring new recruits, not necessarily line managing, but mentoring, team leading certificates that are available. We've got a 6-week online course available right now for £149 per person, which includes an ILM qualification, and of course our apprenticeship offer. And you've met Dan this morning, who has been through the level 3 and the level 5 apprenticeship, and you've heard the benefit of that. Also, if you're joining us this morning and you're thinking, I need a few different things from our business, or you're just considering your options, reach out to us at employers@weston.ac.uk, and we'll help you build a bespoke package of support for your business. Coming up next, we have on the 3rd of February, the Southwest Regional Police Unit, the Regional Cybercrime Unit, will be talking about how we can keep our businesses safe online, specifically during the pandemic. On the 23rd of February, we have Paul Whedon, who will be talking to us about how we can effectively communicate through a screen, which looks like it's going to be the way forward, even in a blended approach post-COVID. Paul will be sharing his expertise from his experience as a TV presenter. And on the 16th of March, we're going to be talking about mental health and building resilient teams, something that came out through our interview today with Dr. Paul, the importance of supporting our employees, building resilient teams, and also dealing with the impact of the pandemic amongst our staff. And that's something really significant that we all need to bear in mind, not only now, but also for the future. So at that point, I'm just going to finally thank Louise for asking the questions this morning, and also Daniel and all of our apprentices. I'm going to thank you all for joining as attendees. Fantastic attendance. Hope to see you at an event very soon. And finally, I'd like to offer my special thanks to Dr. Paul Phillips CBE, Principal and Chief Executive of Weston College Group, for a fascinating interview. It's certainly one that we're going to find hard to beat, Dr. Paul, in the future. So from me and on behalf of the team and all the attendees, thank you for your time and your insight. And I wish everyone on the call and the event a very good day and successful next few weeks and months. Stay safe, everyone. Take care, and we'll hope to see you next time. Bye for now.